Are you looking to modernize your old VHS, Hi8 or other vintage cameras from the 70s, 80s and 90s? Today, I'm going to show you how to create a simple DIY cable that allows your retro cameras to work easily with a Mini DVR. This cable solves the compatibility issue between the Mini DVR pinout and the analog output from these older cameras, letting you record directly to a microSD card. This video is a follow-up to my last review of the Mini DVR. By the end of this video, you'll be ready to use your vintage camera in a modern way, capturing footage hassle-free. Let's start with a quick recap. The Mini DVR has two main ports, an input and an output. The input port allows you to record what your camera sends through the AV port, while the output port gives you the option to see the video on an external monitor. If you want a full review of all the features of the Mini DVR, here's a link to my previous video. Of course, not all camera AV ports are the same, so today we'll be making a 3.5mm main cable and an RCA adapter, which is another common port found on cameras from that era. Later on, if there's interest, I'll make more adapter cables, for example one for Panasonic cameras or another for JVC cameras. Let me know in the comments if you are interested. Let's do a quick test. Here, I have a cable that I have already modified to be compatible. If I connect it to my test monitor, we get a picture, so it works. Now, if I plug in a generic cable, as you can see, there's no picture. Let's fix that. Throughout my experiments, I bought several Mini DVRs, and here's what usually comes in the package. Typically, the Mini DVR comes in a small box, along with the cable and the manual. Sometimes, I've received two cables in the box, but for this tutorial, I'll assume you only get one. If you do get two cables, it will be even easier, and I will explain how to handle that later. The most important thing to understand, as I mentioned it earlier, is that the Mini DVR's pinout is different from what retro camera use. The pinouts refer what signal each part of the connector carries. In this super detailed diagram, made with the most advanced engineering design software, you can clearly see the difference. On the Mini DVR, the first pole is the white wire, which is audio left, and this matches the standard for retro cameras. The second pole on the Mini DVR is the green wire, which is for audio right, but this doesn't match the standard as the second pole on retro cameras is for video. The third pole, the black wire on the Mini DVR, matches the standard, and the fourth pole, which is the red wire, is for video on the Mini DVR, but again, it doesn't match the standard, as retro camera use the fourth pole for audio right. So if you're lucky and your Mini DVR comes with two cables, all you have to do is solder the ends like this, the white wire to the white wire, the green wire to the red wire, the black wire to the black wire, and the red wire to the green wire. And that's it. Thanks for watching. See you next week. No, just kidding. There's still more to come. But yes, if you have both cables, that's all you need to do, unless you want to make two cables, one for the camera and another for the monitor. Or if your package only came with one cable, here's what you will need to do. First of all, we need a 4-pole 3.5mm male connector. You can buy just the connector, they're very cheap, or you can buy a generic cable and cut it to use just the connector. If you have an older cable you're not using, that works too. The only requirement is that it has 4 poles. And if you're a beginner and terribly bad at soldering like me, I recommend cutting the cable, since it's much easier to solder the wires instead of directly onto the connector. Remember, I'm not a professional, this is just a hobby I love, so if there's any pro watching this, please try not to laugh. First, we'll build the cable using this connector. The first thing we need to do is identify which pole of the connector corresponds to each section at the bottom. To do that, I simply use my multimeter in continuity mode, and in the end, I came up with this diagram, which I hope it will be very helpful for you. Additionally, as you can see, I've already labeled the signal for each pole, following the standard layout used by retro cameras. That means we need to solder the white wire, which is for audio left, to this point, the red wire, which is for video, to this point, the black wire, which is ground, goes here, and finally the green wire, which is for audio right, to this last point. I'll start by soldering the ground wire, which is the black one. Following the diagram, we'll solder into this point. But first, I'm going to cut the cable because it's too long for my setup. I want something more compact, but you can leave it as it is if that works for you. First, I apply a bit of flux and some solder to all the points to make the process easier, and then, with some patience, we solder the wire to the designated point. And here we have our first soldered point. Like I said, I'm terrible at soldering, so if I can do it, I'm sure anyone can. Now I'm going to solder the red wire, which is for video, and according to the diagram it goes to this point. And that's it. It looks great. Just be careful that none of the solder points touch each other to avoid any issues. Now that I've soldered the audio and video wires, we're ready to do our first test. I'll connect my Mini DVR to this test monitor using the output port. By the way, this monitor is perfect for this kind of cameras, and I got it for just $9 on AliExpress, but it needs to be modified to work this way. Let me know in the comments if you would like me to make a video on how to modify it. Now I plug in the cable. And yes, it works. Now we just need to solder the remaining audio wires. But just when I thought everything was perfect, the disaster knocked the door. I forgot to put the connector cover on, so I had to desolder everything just to get it on. This always happens to me. Let me know in the comments if it's ever happened to you too. Let's keep going. All that's left is to solder the white wire, which is for audio left, to this point, and the green wire, which is for audio right, to this other point. And there you have it. The soldering is done. And now we've got our finished cable. Let's test it again just to be sure. Beautiful. It's working perfectly. Now I'm going to quickly explain how to do it with the generic cable. First, I cut one end of the cable. Now, using the multimeter in continuity mode, I tested each wire to find out which pole it corresponded to. And I ended up with this diagram. The downside is that if your cable isn't exactly the same, you won't be able to follow this diagram, and you will have to figure out which pole corresponds to each wire using a multimeter. But as you can see, the principle is the same, and it's not complicated at all. So in this case, the red wire, which is for audio left, I solder it to the white wire. The blue wire, which is for video, I solder it to the red wire. The green wire, which is ground, I solder it to the black wire. And the yellow wire, which is for audio right, I solder it to the green wire. To make the cable look neater, I like to use these small heat shrink tubes. They're very cheap and the results looks great, but if you don't have any, you can just use electrical tape to insulate the wires. First, I'm going to solder the video wire. According to the diagram, I need to connect the red wire to the blue one. This is how it looks now. We just apply heat with the lighter, so the heat shrink tube can do its job. Now let's solder the ground wire. According to the diagram, we need to connect the black wire to the green one. And that's how it looks. At this point, we've soldered ground and video, so we can do a quick test by connecting the Mini DVR to the monitor to check for a video signal. Perfect! It's working really good. Now, following the diagram, this is how the 4 wires are soldered. And this is how the final product looks. And that's it. We have a new cable. Now, with the 2 cables we made, we can connect an external monitor if we want through the Mini DVR's output port and connect our camera to the Mini DVR's input port, and we are ready to record everything onto the microSD card. Awesome, right? And now, as I promised, what happened with these beautiful cameras that don't have a 3.5mm output and use RCA instead? Based on what we've seen so far, we could make a cable that's compatible with the Mini DVR on one side and has RCA connectors on the other. However, I prefer to make an adapter that has a 3.5mm input on one side and RCA connectors on the other side, because most of the cameras that I have and the modifications that I've done has a 3.5mm input. This way, I will choose the adapters just when I need them. To make the adapter, we're going to need a 4-pole 3.5mm female connector. You can find it really cheap on AliExpress. And 2 male RCA connectors. It's really probable that you already have a cable lying around that you're not using. That will be perfect. If not, you can buy them really cheap. To figure out the pinout for this cable, meaning which signal each wire color carries, what I did was connect a standard video cable and then use the multimeter to measure continuity between the RCA connectors and the wires on the connector, and this is how I ended up with this diagram. So we will solder like this. Both the audio and video connectors share ground, so we will connect the 2 black RCA wires to the green wire from the female connector, which is ground. Then, since most of these cameras have mono audio, we'll join the 2 audio wires from the female connector, which are the red and black wires, and that wires get soldered to the red wire from the RCA connector, and the video wire from the RCA connector, which is the yellow one, will solder into the white wire from the female connector. I'll start by soldering ground. Remember to join the 2 black wires and solder them to the green wire. Now, I've soldered the yellow wire to the white wire, which is for video. Then, I join the black and red wires with the red wire for audio. Apply heat to the heat shrink tubes. And that's it. We're done. You can make it shorter, depending on your needs. Now, all that's left is to test it. We connect the adapter cable to the camera's RCA port, then one of the 3.5mm cables we made to the Mini DVR's input port. And from the output port, we connect our test monitor. And there you go, we have video signal. Now we can record all that we want on the SD card and use an external monitor if we want. Before ending this video, I really want to thank everyone who's been supporting this small channel. I love reading your comments and sharing these beautiful cameras with you. I have so many projects in mind, but as you know, finding time to dedicate to your passion these days is the hardest part. However, I promise exciting things are coming. I don't know if you're noticing this video, but I'm taking your suggestions about my voice tone into account, and I'm working hard on speaking a bit clearer and louder. Also, we're celebrating! We've reached 1,000 subscribers! Thank you! Please support me by leaving a comment and a like. That helps a lot with YouTube's algorithm to give me more visibility. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. I really hope this video was helpful to you. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.